Hello and welcome to the Winneshiek Energy District's webinar, Act Now Clean Energy Incentives for Businesses. My name's Kristen Eggen and I'm the Executive Director here at the Winneshiek Energy District. I'll be your host today. This webinar came about in response to the questions that we've received in our office in response to the significant changes to federal clean energy policy, especially the passing of the July 4th, 2025 One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So today's program is geared up to help you navigate the changing landscape of clean energy incentives so that you can move forward confidently with your energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This will be a 30-minute recorded webinar. I ask that you stay on mute during the presentation and feel free to come off mute for the Q&A at the end or submit your questions to the chat. The recording and the slides will be emailed sometime later today after the event and also put up on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, I'll drop that in the chat right now. There are also two opportunities to learn about changes to residential tax credits, and those will be one at noon that we're doing in partnership with our friends at Green Neighbor Challenge, and I'll drop a link to the chat in the chat to that right now. And then we are also hosting another Winneshiek Energy District one at 5 p.m. today, and you can sign up for that at energydistrict.org/events. All right. And with no further ado, I will send this over to Paul Cutting, Winneshiek Energy District's energy planner. And Paul's been helping homes, farms, and businesses navigate clean energy since he started at WED back in 2022. So welcome, Paul.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Let me just share my screen here. You can see my screen? Excellent. Okay. Um, so what I'm going to do today is give you guys all just kind of a brief background of the tax credits as they exist today, mostly relating to commercial solar tax credits and tax credits for commercial geothermal, and then outline some of the changes that were brought about as part of the OBBBA Act that was passed last month. So before I get started, I just want to say, broadly speaking, like this is to provide general advice. I kind of always give this disclaimer. I am by no means the expert on all of this. Really, when you delve into the details, there's so much there. I think the overarching theme, perhaps, is that all of these changes have created a great deal of uncertainty. So you, as the business owner, having the confidence to move forward is quite challenging given the fact that all of these rules have changed and there's still lots of unknowns out there. So we're going to try to present at least the information as we know it, and directed more toward those who are operating small businesses who are thinking of doing solar projects themselves. So when I say commercial solar, that could be anything from what, a large utility installs down to what a downtown business owner installs. So the concerns for both of those individuals are going to be quite diverse and wide-ranging. Our focus is going to be more on the smaller user side and to just present some of the overarching themes as we know them and as we understand them. So generally speaking, especially given the tight deadlines that are in place, like consulting with legal advice, your tax accountant, like is absolutely paramount first and foremost, to ensure that you're able to take advantage of the tax credits. So kind of just to lay the groundwork here of what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to present just the slide basically on the tax credits as they exist under the IRA, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the bill that was passed in 2022, and then define some of the changes that were brought about as part of the OBBBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed last year. We'll talk about some of the deadlines as we understand them, and then talk about a few different ideas that were put forward that might influence your ability to take advantage of the tax credit. One being construction start dates, and another being a concept called foreign entities of concern rules. And then finally, I'll finish up with kind of how I see it, how you might still take advantage of the tax credits and what that might look like over the next few months. Um, so the tax credits as they exist. So we're talking about primarily solar here. The Inflation Reduction Act had great incentives for businesses for solar and also for geothermal. So that's kind of the focus of what we're talking about. Essentially, the tax credit, there was a base 30% tax credit. So any project that was placed into service was eligible for a 30% federal tax credit. In addition to that 30% tax credit, there were what we call adders. So depending on your geographic location, potentially the community that your project is placed in, the clientele that you're serving, you could potentially qualify for additional funds beyond that base 30%. So for example, in Elm Key County, projects that were basically anywhere but within the city of Waukon were eligible for an additional 10% beyond the base 30% through the Energy Community Bonus Adder, which was an adder for census tracts where either a coal mine or a coal generation facility had recently closed, that coal generation facility being the Lansing power plant that had closed a few years prior. So if you were installing solar in Lansing, for example, you'd be eligible for 40% back in the form of the tax credit. Both of those are preserved under the new bill that was passed, but they're then subject to enhanced rules that we'll get into here in a bit. And then finally, I'll just make this note, this presentation isn't necessarily for non-taxable entities, but what the Inflation Reduction Act allowed for was, for the first time, for organizations that didn't have tax liability to take advantage of tax credits through a process called either elective payment or direct payment. Basically, that would be a cash payment in lieu of tax credit because you don't have federal tax liability. That is also preserved under the bill that was passed, but it is subject to the new deadlines and the new rules that are congruent with the new commercial rules. So what changed kind of at a glance? So now there's sunsets. So these tax credits were to have been in place until 2032. Essentially, what the bill does is it phases these tax credits out on a much accelerated rate, depending on how you go about it. It might be potentially the end of this year through the middle of next year, and then there's a begin construction portion that might come into play. But generally speaking, it claws those tax credits back well before their scheduled expiration of 2023. Um, So essentially, the new rules for solar state that basically you have to begin construction on your project 1 year after the bill was passed. It was passed and signed into law July 4th of this year. So instead of 2032 being that deadline, the new deadline is next year, next July. Um, so a project has to be placed in construction by next July. And then, generally speaking, you have up to 4 years to place that project in service. So you could begin construction as late as next summer, and then you'd have 4 years to actually place that project into service. The other option that you might potentially have is that projects that don't meet that deadline of next July for starting construction, they still qualify for the tax credit so long as they're placed in service by the end of 2027. So accelerating that time frame up substantially. In addition to that, they introduced the new foreign entities of concern restrictions, which take into or which go into effect at the end of this year, which add additional complication to it. Um, so I've used the term begin construction. So like I said, you can begin construction as late as next year, and then you'd have 4 years to bring your project online. What does begin construction mean? That's a defined term as it relates to the IRS. So historically speaking, generally speaking, that means begin construction in some nature, some physical form, either on-site or off-site. In addition to that, you can basically what we call safe harbor or kind of reserve placement of that construction by basically signing a contract with your contractor and putting 5% of project costs down as kind of a reserve for your ability to start that project into the future. As part of that, if that was something that you were to entertain, you'd have to have substantial documentation and legal contracts to justify and support the fact that the project has in fact begun construction. Now, when we're talking about beginning construction, like this is more as it relates to larger projects, like for example, utility scale solar. We're not talking about someone's downtown solar array on top of their building. We're talking about like a huge solar array here that might require like very long lead times for interconnection with the local utility. It might require, utility board approval. There might be financing mechanisms that have to go into play, and actually getting a project from concept generation to execution can take a really long time. That's generally not the case with small projects. You can begin construction and complete construction, on a small array in just a few days, depending on the complexity. So some of these rules might not apply. Um, but so the begin construction might pertain more to utility scale solar, but still nonetheless, by locking in through safe harbor mechanisms, you could, in theory, extend that deadline beyond next year to ensure that you're able to take advantage of the tax credit for some period beyond that if you're not physically at the point of moving forward with that project. So that's kind of how the law set forth the begin construction portion. 3 days after that, there was an executive order that was issued, which basically gave the IRS and the Treasury Department a period of, I believe, 45 days to come up with essentially new rules for what begin construction actually means. So the executive order basically provides the directive to those entities to re-examine those definitions. So we don't know actually what those definitions are, but within the executive order, it basically says that it wants these entities to strictly enforce the phase out of the investment tax credits for solar and wind. So that's like the overarching theme of what they want the changes to be. And it says they want them to issue new and revised guidance on the meaning of begin construction, ensuring that tax credit eligibility cannot be artificially accelerated or manipulated, and restricting safe harbors unless a substantial portion of the facility has actually been built. Um, so, reading between the lines, this is kind of potentially a backdoor way of further complicating the rules regarding or surrounding the investment tax credit and making it harder and more difficult and potentially quickening the period at which these tax credits are phased out. Um, the executive order gave, I believe, 45 days, like I said, for the Treasury to come up with new rules, which places that sometime here in August where new rules will be issued. So there might be some degree of clarification as to what begin construction actually means. But that's definitely something that you'll want to keep your eyes on as you begin to think about solar. Um, the other portion here is the foreign entities of concern rules. Now, the foreign entities of concern rules refer to companies and not actual countries. So there are certain defined countries that are problematic, those being China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So basically, if your project involves parts, suppliers, or contracts or contacts of companies linked to those countries, you could potentially be disqualified for getting the federal tax credit. The foreign entities of concern rule begins to go into effect at the start of 2026. So projects that are under construction this year or that have been placed into service this calendar year are not subject to the new foreign entities of concern rules. Um, Presumably, the foreign entities of concern rules applies to material sourcing around panels, racking systems, inverters, for namely for solar projects. Geothermal projects probably are not going to be impacted as greatly as solar projects are because solar panel production happens primarily in Asia. It's not necessarily a North American production. So largely relating to solar, probably not so much relating to geothermal. Um, so bottom line, to not be subject to the foreign entities of concern rule, getting your project placed into construction or beginning construction this year, or ideally finished this year, is going to allow you to avoid those new rules. Um, so broadly speaking, like, how do you move forward? Like, I've talked to a lot of people, and you explain all the intricacies of all of this and all the complexities, all the unknowns. People are hard pressed to feel they have the confidence to move forward. I get it. I think it's totally real and valid, given the fact that the executive order redefines what begin construction actually means. That's a huge component too, for your ability to move forward. So bottom line, if you're in the pipeline currently with a contractor to have solar put on your facility, moving forward now, ideally before the end of the year, is the best surefire way that you're able to make it happen and to receive the tax credit. Um, if that's not possible, definitely starting by the middle of next year, July 4th of next year, and placing those projects um, in service by the end of 2027, in theory, should allow you to be able to claim the tax credit, assuming the begin construction rules don't change substantially. So there'll be clarification as to what that means. So later this month, we might have some understanding or like knowledge of whether those rules have been tightened and whether, in fact, that window has closed down further. But moving forward as soon as you can is definitely first and foremost paramount. Um, the energy community, like I said, and the domestic content bonus adders are still available. So depending on your geographic area, that can be huge. So pretty much any project within Alameda County is eligible for a 40% tax credit. When you couple that with business depreciation and potentially REAP, which Steve is going to talk about here in a sec, you're talking about substantial savings and projects that have return on investments that are quite substantial and quite compelling, that might provide you the confidence of moving forward and having the confidence that your investment is a sound one and does make sense. Um, and then finally, if you're a nonprofit or non-taxable entity, churches, local governments, school districts, the rules have not changed regarding your ability to receive a cash payment in lieu of the tax credit. There's still opportunity there, but note that you're subject to all of these new rules that commercial users are also subject to. So with that, I'll hand it off to Steve.
Okay, great presentation. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to assume everyone can hear me okay. Given the short time that we have, I'll just talk as opposed to showing a PowerPoint today, primarily about REAP. And I wanted to mention, especially since Lily Jensen is in the meeting today, that there were actually two organizations that received REAP technical assistance grants. And one of them is her organization, Northeast Iowa RC&D. And the other organization was Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. And that's who I work for as an energy coach and grant writer, specifically for the purpose of helping either small businesses or farms apply for the USDA Rural Energy for America program, otherwise known as REAP, the acronym REAP. The REAP grant is funded by the USDA. It's a 25% grant. It has two types. Half of the grant is for energy efficiency improvement, and the other half is for renewable energy systems. And on the renewable side, solar energy projects are by far the most common and most popular within the state of Iowa. So to build upon what Paul was mentioning, a lot of what he was talking about had to do with tax credits per se. It's possible to combine the tax credits with REAP benefits for if you have a small business or farm that is considering solar. So in addition to the 30% tax credit and the possibility of 15% depreciation, if you are successful in getting a REAP grant, that could be well over 50% of the installation cost for solar being paid for by the combination of a REAP grant plus having the tax credit. We have quite a bit of information on the SETI, that's the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa webpage. So I wanted to encourage anyone to make sure you go to our webpage at cleanenergydistricts.org and feel free to take a look at two different types of information that we have there. One is about our Go Solar Now campaign, and that's encouraging small businesses and farms to consider if you've been thinking about solar to consider beginning a project now, since tax credits will be winding down for commercial businesses over time. Residential, by the way, this is the last year, 2025 is the last year for there to be tax credit for residences for solar. So that's yet another reason for urgency. The REAP program, the grant, as far as we know at this point in time, will continue at the 25% grant rate. So we're based on the information that we have from USDA, that program will continue. So we're hopeful that will provide that. I know we're short on time. Kristen, I didn't know if it would be worth if I had enough time to share my screen to show the webpage, or if it's just enough at this point to say, go to the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa webpage, go to the tab for Go Solar Now. That has some really good information in it, some tabs that you can click on with some of the details that Paul was talking about. And then in addition, if you're wanting to see information about our REAP Energy Coaching Program, there's a tab for that, for REAP Energy Coaching, with information about that as well. It has information about me. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me at any time, and I can provide more information about REAP and the free energy coaching services we provide.
Steve, thanks so much. I did drop the link to the REAP page that you mentioned in the chat, so that's there for everyone. And would you also like to drop your email in the chat in case folks want to follow up with any questions? Awesome.
Yep, will do. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So at this point, we are going to open it up for questions. You can come off mute or drop your question in the chat, and I'd be happy to moderate for you. I'll also mention that there's a great resource from the Clean Energy Business Network that is a one-page overview of all the tax credits, what they used to be, and what they are now. So that link is also in the chat for your convenience.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have, for our business, we have the solar set up, or basically we're contracted with the group that's going to do it. But we had applied for a REAP grant, one of the 50% ones. And then basically they never sent it for competition because everything got paused. So the USDA had told us, you might want to consider the 25% grant because it's unlikely that that one's going to go forward. The 50% one, which we completely understand, that's probably off the table. But then it seems like there's that question of the start of the project and when that funding, whether or not you can get that 25% grant. And so a little bit of this conflict between we want to get the tax credit, make sure that we're eligible for that. But if we're trying to get this REAP grant, when can we start the project? And can you talk just a little bit about how that conflict?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'm aware of the December 2024 grants that were submitted and have been in limbo for 8 months now, which drives all of us crazy. And I've had no less than 50 conversations with USDA complaining about that and asking for clarification. They really don't know what to say at this point. But just in terms of how the rules for REAP are, based on my understanding of it, if at some point those December applications were to compete for funding, then if your grant is approved and awarded, then I believe the beginning date on when you can begin spending money would have been when the notice for when the application was considered complete. And that you may have already had that notification way back in January of 2025, shortly after that was applied for. If, on the other hand, you decide to just forget about that application and then apply for a new grant at the 25% grant rate, my understanding is that would make your old application null and void, that you would then be applying at the different rate. And again, the same thing would apply, that as soon as your application is submitted, and then as soon as you get a application complete notice, that's theoretically when your project can begin. But they also are part of the grant is that you're not supposed to spend any money on the project until after it's been awarded. So you would get this completion notice first, and you might not get an award notification until 2 months later. So, there's this time lag. That's what makes it so frustrating with that December 2024 application. The other rule that's at play is that you're only allowed to apply once per year for either renewable. You can also apply for energy efficiency too. So those December 2024 applications are considered in a previous year. So you would be allowed, my understanding is, to be able to submit a new application now.
Okay. And I got the same thing from the USDA, that if we submitted, it would make the old one null and void. So
I personally have contacted our Grassley and Representative Hinson and Senator Ernst, and have really gotten no satisfactory answer, no answer at all from Grassley and Ernst at all about this. I'm getting calls from other applicants saying, "Hey, where's my money?" And you're probably making the same type of phone call. It's just very frustrating because your application would have been submitted legally according to the rules of the program at that time.
yes.
Sorry.
Actually, I got the exact same. I got no response from Grassley or Ernst. Hinson did respond, and they did a little bit of work, and we actually had our notice of complete in November of 24. So,
okay.
And had submitted it back in October, I believe.
Steve, I just want to jump in because Betsy, I think that you actually could submit because of the way the fiscal years fall. The last communication we had from the USDA is that you could actually submit the same exact application for a 25% REAP Farm Bill grant and basically have both the 50 and the 25% in at the same time. Then if one or the other is funded, you would pull the other. The bigger problem is that both of those will run into the timelines on the tax credits, in terms of which, because of when the constructions have to start and be completed. And so that's what we're seeing, Steve. I don't know, is that we've got entities that are deciding, do we keep holding out for any sort of REAP funding, or do we take the tax credits while we know we can? And that's not something that we advise on. That's a huge business decision that you need to talk to particular, your own tax professionals about, because it's so complicated. but that's the reality, is that folks are coming against these double deadlines that don't line up very well.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for providing that clarification. Yeah, that follows what the USDA is saying, and each application is a different story. So it just really depends upon the type of project that it is. What's frustrating is that the applications that we wrote in March have all been awarded and funded. So they leapfrogged over the December applications and allowed for the March applications to go through.
Great question, Betsy. And thank you, Lily and C, for jumping in on that. I'll mention that it's 11:33, so if you need to leave, just want to say thank you for attending today. We will be sticking on the call to keep answering questions, so feel free to keep coming off of mute.
Yeah, Kristen, I actually just have a question for Steve or Paul. Do either of you know if the FEOC rule changes are going to apply to REAP too, or are those only related to tax credits?
Good question.
Yep. That's about where we are too. Who knows? Like, I mean, I would assume that most suppliers are modifying all of their equipment purchases and their supply chains to meet the FEOC rules no matter what. But everything that I've seen on FEOC is so hyper specific on tax credits that it isn't super clear if those are also going to apply to REAP.
Thanks for bringing up a new point to ask USDA for clarification about Lily.
I know. That's the thing. Ask someone and they don't know because they don't know.
And as rules like that become more clear, and Paul mentioned the new Treasury rules that we'll be gaining clarity around in, we hope, the weeks to come. Those are things that we can be including in our Energy District newsletter, PSAs for our community. So I guess call to action if you're not subscribed to that. As we learn more, we'll be sharing in that newsletter, which is available on our homepage. Any other questions from attendees? Any specific projects you're thinking about? Well, with that, we will wrap up our call for today. Thank you all for attending. And if you have any questions or any specific projects that you would like to chat through, you're welcome to reach out to us. Paul can be contacted at paul@energydistrict.org. And you can also just send any general inquiries to contact@energydistrict.org. We're here to be a community resource. There's a lot changing right now. And if we can help your clean energy project move forward, we're happy to do that. So thanks so much and have a great day.